I always thought we had a solid marriage. My wife, Lisa, and I had been together for over 7 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I figured that was just part of life. We had our routines. I'd go to work, she'd handle her freelance graphic design projects, and we'd meet up in the evenings to catch up over dinner or binge watch a new series. At least that's how it used to be. Lately, I'd noticed some changes. Lisa seemed distant, often glued to her phone, texting late into the night. I used to tease her about it, but it felt different this time. She'd get defensive if I asked who she was texting. "Just work stuff, don't be jealous," she'd say with a dismissive wave of her hand. The first time I brushed it off, but the more it happened, the more uneasy I felt. Then there were the late nights. She started volunteering to stay late at the community theater, helping out with set design for a new play. At first, I was supportive, even proud of her getting involved in something she loved. But when I'd text her to see when she'd be home, her responses felt vague, like she was hiding something. "I'll be home late, don't wait up," or "We're just running through some scenes." I tried not to think too much of it. Maybe I was being paranoid. But when I started hearing whispers from friends about a hot new director at the theater, my stomach dropped. The director, Derek, was reportedly charismatic, talented, and most troubling, the kind of guy who could easily charm anyone, especially someone like Lisa. One Friday night, I decided to surprise her and show up at the theater. I brought her favorite takeout, thinking we could have a late dinner together. I walked in, expecting to catch her in the middle of a rehearsal or working on sets. Instead, I found them in the green room, Lisa and Derek laughing and leaning into each other as they talked. My heart sank. I tried to convince myself it was innocent, but when I heard Derek say, "Just one more kiss for luck," it felt like a punch to the gut. I turned around and left quietly, my mind racing. I didn't want to confront her yet. I needed proof. I couldn't just accuse her without knowing. For sure, the next few days were a blur. I played the role of the oblivious husband, all smiles and casual conversation while my heart was breaking inside. I started spying on her, not in a crazy, obsessive way, but just casually observing her behavior. I found myself waiting outside the theater after rehearsals, watching her interactions with Derek. They were too cozy for my comfort. The way she laughed, the way her eyes lit up when he entered the room, something was definitely off. One evening, I convinced a mutual friend to come with me to a performance. I didn't want to confront her in front of anyone, but I felt like I needed to see how they were together in a public space. Watching them from a distance, it was clear there was chemistry. They'd share looks that felt intimate, a connection that felt wrong. After the show, I loitered by the outdoor patio where the cast mingled. I saw Lisa and Derek step outside, standing a little too close. When I overheard her giggle at something he said, my blood boiled. I felt sick. My heart raced as I watched them walk away, laughing, and then, suddenly, they kissed. That was it. I felt a whirlwind of emotions swirl within me: anger, betrayal, confusion. I couldn't believe that she'd do this to me. I was furious, but I also felt a crushing sadness. We had shared so much. I drove home, fists clenched on the steering wheel. My mind was racing with thoughts of what I would say to her when I confronted her. What kind of excuses would she give? I rehearsed every possible scenario in my head, and none of them made the gut-wrenching reality any easier to swallow. When I finally got home, the house felt too quiet. I waited for Lisa to come in, my heart pounding in my chest. She walked in later than usual, a wide smile on her face, but I wasn't seeing her that way anymore. I was ready to expose the truth. I could feel it in my bones. The betrayal was hanging in the air like a dark cloud, and I was ready to unleash the storm. The moment she stepped into the living room, I confronted her. "Where have you been, Lisa?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her smile faltered, and for a brief moment, I saw panic cross her face. Little did she know, the storm was just beginning. The atmosphere in the room shifted as Lisa's smile faded. She stepped back slightly, as if preparing to defend herself, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. "What do you mean? I was at the theater working like I told you," she replied, trying to sound casual, but her voice wavered just enough to tell me she was lying. "Working, huh?" I couldn't help the bitterness that crept into my voice. "Is that what you call it when you're kissing your director? Because I saw it, Lisa. I saw everything." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I needed her to understand I wasn't going to let her brush this under the rug. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out at first. The shocked expression on her face was a mixture of anger and disbelief, and I could see the gears turning in her mind as she struggled to concoct a response. "What are you talking about?" "You must have misunderstood," she finally spat out, her defensive tone rising. "Misunderstood? I watched you and Derek flirt like you were the only two people in the world. I saw you kiss him outside after the show." My heart was pounding, both from anger and the weight of betrayal. "You don't get to lie to me anymore, Lisa. I know the truth." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment I could see the mask of confidence slip. "You don't know what you're talking about. He's just a friend," she insisted, her voice rising. "You're being ridiculous and paranoid. I'm working with him." "Working? Is that what you call it when you spend late nights getting drinks with your friend? You've changed, and I deserve to know why." My anger was boiling over, and I felt like I was losing control. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It felt like a confrontation, a battle for the truth, and all I wanted was to hear her admit it. "I can't believe you accuse me of this," she shouted back, her frustration boiling over. "You're the one who's been distant. Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of focusing on your job, I wouldn't have to find someone else to talk to. You're such a jerk, always thinking the worst of me." Her words were like a slap in the face. I expected her to apologize, to show some remorse, but instead she was shifting the blame onto me. "So it's my fault you decided to cheat?" I shot back, incredulous. "You've been lying and sneaking around, and now you want to act like I'm the bad guy. What are you even saying, Lisa?" She looked at me then, and for a moment I saw something break in her expression, a flicker of realization that she had been caught in more than just a little lie. But rather than acknowledging it, she turned cold, crossing her arms defensively. "You don't even care about my feelings. You never have. Maybe I just needed someone who understands me." "Understand you?" I replied, incredulous. "You think Derek is the one who understands you, the guy who's been using you to get ahead in his career?" I gestured wildly, the frustration bubbling inside me. "You're smart, Lisa. You know he's just playing you." Her expression hardened, and I could tell I had struck a nerve. "You don't know anything about him. He's a great director and he's talented. Maybe I'm just tired of being someone's background character in this life." Background character. We were building a life together. We had plans. My voice cracked as I felt the weight of our shared history crashing down on me. "You want to throw that away for a fling with some guy who's probably just going to use you." The silence that fell between us was heavy, filled with unspoken words and mounting tension. I felt anger, sadness, confusion, all of it swirling together as I stared at the woman I thought I knew. "I can't believe you're doing this," she finally said, her voice low. "You're making me feel like I'm the villain here, but you don't know how hard it's been for me." "How hard?" I pressed, my patience thinning as her excuses rolled off her tongue. "Hard enough to cheat. Hard enough to betray the trust we built over years." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed to vanish. I could see her struggling to come up with something, anything that would absolve her of the guilt. But there was nothing, just silence, and in that moment I realized that the woman I thought I married was slipping away. And then it hit me, this wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about betrayal, about trust, about the fragility of our marriage, and I was done feeling powerless. I needed to take charge. I needed to fight back, not just for myself, but for the life we had built. I was angry, but I was also determined. I wouldn't let her walk away from this unscathed. I'd expose the truth, not just to her, but to everyone. I wouldn't just be the hurt husband, I would be the one who fought back. I was going to ruin Derek's reputation, and I was going to make sure he faced the consequences of his actions. The plan started forming in my mind as I watched Lisa, her defenses still up, but now I saw the cracks. I wasn't going to let this end quietly. I was going to take action. The stage was set for revenge, and all I had to do was play my part. The moment I made the decision to take action, a sense of clarity washed over me. I felt a fire igniting within me. I wasn't just going to sit passively by while Lisa and Derek continued their affair. No, I was going to expose him for the fraud he was, and I was going to ruin his reputation in the theater community. I spent the next couple of days gathering information. I knew that Derek had a reputation in the industry, but it seemed more like a facade than the substance behind it. I started my research. digging into everything I could find about him. I looked up past productions he directed, reviews, and anything that could give me a lead, anything I could use to turn the tables. One evening, while I was combing through articles and social media posts, I stumbled upon a theater critic's blog. There, I found a series of glowing reviews for Derek's productions. The praise was excessive, almost too good to be true. It struck me as odd that someone could receive such high accolades consistently without a hitch. I wondered if those reviews had been bought or manipulated in any way. I had to dig deeper. I found forums where actors and crew members discussed their experiences working. With him, it was a mixed bag. Some people praised him, but others mentioned his questionable practices. He was known for being charming but ruthless, often pushing people to their limits. This started to paint a clearer picture of the man who had become the object of Lisa's affections. The more I uncovered, the more convinced I became that I could expose Derek. I reached out to a few former actors and crew members who had worked with him. I told them about my situation and asked if they'd be willing to share their experiences. Most were hesitant at first, but when I explained how he had been using Lisa as pawns in his games, they quickly warmed up to the idea of bringing him down. I started piecing together a timeline of events, gathering testimonies from others about Derek's manipulative behavior and his ability to charm his way into people's lives before discarding them as if they were nothing more than props. I wanted to show not just Lisa but the entire theater community the truth. It was time for a reality check. The breakthrough came when I found an article about a production that had garnered a lot of attention but was later revealed to be riddled with issues. Several actors had left mid-production due to Derek's abrasive directing style, and the show was ultimately panned by critics. I contacted the author of the article and asked if they had any interest in a new story about Derek's latest shenanigans. After sharing what I knew, the journalist was intrigued. They agreed to meet with me, and I provided them with the evidence I had gathered. As we discussed Derek's reputation, it felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. I was gaining momentum, and I could feel victory just on the horizon. With the journalist on my side, I felt emboldened. I knew I had to let Lisa feel the repercussions of her actions, but I also wanted to ensure Derek would pay for the pain he'd caused others. As I sat in my living room planning my next steps, I couldn't help but smile. I was finally taking charge of my life instead of letting Lisa's betrayal dictate my emotions. When I confronted Lisa again, I planned to bring it all out into the open. I wanted her to see that her choices had consequences, not just for her and me but for Derek as well. My heart raced with anticipation as I waited for her to come home that night. When she walked through the door, I felt a mix of anger and resolve. "We need to talk," I said, gesturing for her to sit down. "What now?" she snapped, crossing her arms defensively. "I've been doing some research on Derek," I stated matter-of-factly. "And it turns out he's not the golden boy you think he is." Her expression shifted from annoyance to curiosity, and I could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean that he's been manipulating people for years. I talked to some people who have worked with him, and I have proof. He's not just a talented director, he's a fraud who uses his charm to get what he wants." "Is this some kind of revenge plan?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This isn't revenge for the sake of revenge, Lisa. This is about exposing the truth. You're in love with a man who plays people like puppets, and I can't let you continue to fall for his lies. Stop." "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't do this." "Why not? You've made your choice. You've been lying to me, and now it's time for you to face the consequences of that choice. I'm not going to sit by and let you ruin your life or let him manipulate you any further." Her hands trembled, and I could see the reality of what I was saying hit her like a ton of bricks. "You don't have to hurt him," she pleaded. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to hurt me," I shot back, feeling the anger return. "This is about standing up for myself. You've crossed a line I can't ignore." Lisa looked at me with wide eyes, her defenses crumbling. I could see her heart racing as she realized the depth of the storm I was unleashing. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I was going to ensure she understood the gravity of her actions. As we sat in silence, I could feel the weight of the moment. I was finally taking control, and while it felt empowering, I also knew that there was no turning back. The consequences of our choices were about to unfold, and I was ready to see this through to the end. I would expose Derek, and Lisa would have to face the reality of what her actions had set in motion. The stage was set, and I was determined to make sure that this director would get no standing ovations in the future. With every passing day, my plan to expose Derek unfolded like a well-written script. I had given the journalist all the evidence I had gathered, and they were preparing an in-depth article that would not only expose Derek's questionable practices, but also highlight the emotional toll he had inflicted on others. I could feel the anticipation building as the publication date approached. This was going to be bigger than anything I had envisioned. Meanwhile, the tension at home with Lisa was palpable. It was clear that she was torn between her feelings for Derek and the reality of what was happening. I saw her trying to reach out to me, attempting to mend the rift between us, but I couldn't allow myself to soften just yet. She had made her choices, and I needed her to fully understand the gravity of the situation. One evening, just 2 days before the article was set to go live, I decided to confront Lisa again. I needed to gauge her reaction and see if she had truly grasped the depths of her betrayal. I found her in the kitchen, lost in thought as she prepared dinner. "Can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She turned to me, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Sure. What's on your mind? Do you even realize what you're doing?" I asked, my voice steady. "You're in love with a man who doesn't care about you. He's using you to get ahead in his career, and I'm about to show everyone what kind of man he really is." Lisa paused, her hands stilling in their movements. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious," I replied, my determination unwavering. "This isn't just about our marriage anymore. It's about exposing the truth and protecting anyone else he might hurt. You need to understand the impact of what's happening." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "It just happened and I didn't know how to stop it." "That's not an excuse, Lisa. You made a choice to betray me, and now you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that choice." She looked down, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did," I interrupted. "And now I'm not just going to sit back and watch while you throw everything away. You need to think about what you want and whether you're willing to accept what comes next." "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Then you need to decide whose side you're on," I said, my gaze unwavering. "Derek's or mine, because I won't stand for this betrayal any longer." As she stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of my words, I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. This confrontation was necessary, but it was also painful. I had always loved this woman, and seeing her in turmoil was difficult. But I couldn't let my feelings cloud my judgment. The next day, the article was released, and I felt a rush of exhilaration as I read through it. The journalist had painted Derek in a light that I knew would shock the theater community. They had included testimonies from former actors, crew members, and even a few critics who had previously praised him. It was a comprehensive exposé that detailed his manipulative behavior and the emotional scars he left behind. As I shared the article on social media, I could see the reactions pouring in. Friends, family, and even strangers began commenting, expressing their shock and disbelief at the revelations. I felt a sense of triumph wash over me, knowing that I had taken a stand for myself and for everyone else who had suffered at Derek's hands. Meanwhile, Lisa was beside herself. She began to realize the ramifications of what had unfolded, and her panic only intensified as messages started flooding in from mutual friends and acquaintances. They had read the article, and the whispers about Derek began to spread like wildfire. I watched as Lisa's reality crumbled around her. She tried to defend Derek, insisting that he was a good person who had just made mistakes, but I could see she was struggling to maintain that facade. She was losing friends, and their social circles were closing in on her. Despite the chaos, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had taken back control over my life, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone strip that away from me. I continued to focus on my work, using the momentum from the article to fuel my drive. I was ready for whatever came next, whether it was a confrontation with Derek or dealing with the fallout from Lisa. Few days later, I got word that a small theater company had decided to pull one of their upcoming productions directed by Derek. The article had shaken the confidence of those in the community, and the ripple effect was just beginning. That night, I found Lisa sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. When I walked in, she looked up at me, her eyes red from crying. "I can't believe this is happening," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't understand. I thought he cared about me. I thought we had something real." "Real? Lisa, you were just a stepping stone for him, you have to see that." I fired back, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You thought you could have this little affair without any consequences, and now look at what it's cost you." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face, "but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to see him for what he really is." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you started this mess," I said, feeling the weight of my own heartbreak. "You made your choice, and now you have to deal with it." She looked at me, and in that moment I could see a glimmer of understanding. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting to help her break free from the manipulation she had fallen into. I wanted her to see that she deserved better than a man who treated her as an accessory in his quest for fame. As we sat in silence, I realized that this wasn't just a fight against Derek's reputation. It was also a fight for Lisa's future. I would continue to stand my ground and fight for what was right. The final act was approaching, and I was ready for the climax. It was time for Lisa to choose her path, and I hoped it would be one that led her away from the toxic grip of Derek and back toward a life where she could reclaim her own happiness. The following days were a whirlwind of rising tension and emotional reckoning. The fallout from the article had sent shockwaves through the theater community, and Derek's reputation was crumbling. I found myself at the center of conversations, a mixture of support and pity washing over me from friends and acquaintances alike. But the real battle was happening at home. Lisa was a shadow of her former self. The confident, vibrant woman I once knew was now fraught with anxiety and regret. I watched her struggle to confront the reality of her choices, and while part of me felt a sense of satisfaction at the justice unfolding, another part of me grappled with the woman I had loved. One evening, I returned home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone. I could see the remnants of tears staining her cheeks, and as I stepped closer, I wondered how much longer this misery would continue. "Hey," I said softly, trying to approach her without triggering further emotional turmoil. "How are you holding up?" She looked up at me, her eyes glassy. "Not great," she admitted, biting her lip as if holding back a flood of emotions. "I've lost a lot of friends, and everyone is talking about me. They blame me for his downfall." "Lisa, you're not to blame for what Derek has done. You didn't force him to manipulate people. You weren't the one lying," I reassured her. "You made a mistake, yes, but that doesn't mean you deserve the backlash. It was Derek who played you." "I thought I could handle it," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought it was just a fling, that I could separate my feelings for him from everything else, but I didn't realize how deep it would go." "Now you know," I replied, my tone firm. "You have to learn from this. You can't keep letting men like him dictate your worth." As I spoke, I could see the gears turning in her mind. Maybe she was finally beginning to grasp the full magnitude of her choices, the emotional toll, the deception, and the consequences. "I want to make things right, but I don't know how," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "First, you need to decide what you want," I urged her. "Do you want to keep fighting for something that was never real, or do you want to start rebuilding your life? Because clinging to Derek will only drag you further down." She lowered her gaze, and I could see her battling with her emotions. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice cracking, "but I feel so lost." "That's understandable," I said, softening my tone. "But you need to take responsibility for what you've done. I need to know you're willing to work on this with me, not just because you feel guilty, but because you genuinely want to change." A long silence stretched between us, filled with tension and uncertainty. Eventually, she nodded, her expression resolute. "I want to change. I want to be better. I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to become someone who isn't defined by this mistake." I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. "Then let's figure it out together. We can start with honesty. You need to tell your friends what really happened and how you feel. You owe it to yourself and to them." "I'll do it," she said, determination flooding her voice. "I'll talk to them. I need to take responsibility for my actions." As she began to muster the courage to reach out to her friends, I could see a shift in her demeanor. This was what I had hoped for, a recognition of her mistakes and a desire to forge a new path. We were still facing a monumental challenge, but I felt like we were finally on the same side again. Over the next few weeks, Lisa made strides to reconnect with her friends, genuinely reaching out to explain her side of the story. The reactions varied. Some were supportive while others remained hurt. But she faced them all, refusing to hide behind excuses or lies. It was a painful process, but I could see her starting to rebuild her self-worth, brick by brick, despite the lingering shadows of betrayal. As for Derek, his reputation continued to be shredded in the wake of the article. I kept an eye on how the theater community was responding to the fallout. There were whispers of casting changes, and I learned that multiple productions were distancing themselves from him. It was almost poetic justice, and I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that my actions had played a part in this downfall. One evening, as Lisa and I sat together on the couch, she looked over at me with a thoughtful expression. "I want to thank you," she said, her voice sincere, "for not giving up on me. I know I messed up, but you stood your ground. You held me accountable, and that's something I needed." "I didn't do it to hurt you," I replied, taking her hand in mine. "I did it because I want you to be the best version of yourself. I know we still have a long way to go, but I believe we can get through this together." She smiled, and in that moment I saw a glimpse of the woman I had loved for so long, the vibrant, passionate, and talented person who had once been lost in the shadows. But just as we were beginning to find our footing, I received an unexpected message from the journalist who had exposed Derek. They wanted to meet up for a follow-up discussion. I was intrigued but also apprehensive about what more could come out of this. Had Derek struck back in some way, or was there more to unveil? As I prepared to meet with the journalist, I couldn't shake the feeling that this chapter was far from over. I was ready to face whatever came next. The truth had to be revealed, and I was determined to see this through to the end. Lisa and I were on a path to healing, but the stakes were still high, and I wasn't about to back down now. The following day, I sat nervously in the cafe where I had arranged to meet the journalist. A part of me was excited, but another part felt anxious about what new revelations could emerge. I had come this far, and I was ready to face whatever was thrown my way. When the journalist arrived, they greeted me with a nod and a slight smile. "Thanks for meeting with me. I know this has been a whirlwind for you," they began, sitting down with a notebook and a pen. "I appreciate you reaching out. What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. The journalist flipped through their notes, looking serious. "I wanted to let you know that Derek is not taking this lying down. He's been reaching out to some contacts, trying to discredit the article and paint you in a negative light." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "They're saying you've got a personal vendetta against him, that you're just a jealous husband trying to ruin his career. He's attempting to spin the narrative to make it seem like you're the villain in all this." I felt a surge of anger wash over me. "That's absurd. I didn't do this to hurt him out of jealousy. I did it to expose the truth." "Exactly," the journalist replied, their tone sympathetic. "But when someone is backed into a corner, they'll fight back in whatever way they can. My advice is to brace yourself. He might try to retaliate with his own article or reach out to more people to spread misinformation." I took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. "I won't let him intimidate me. He can try to paint me as the villain all he wants, but I know the truth, and so does Lisa. We've both seen how manipulative he can be." The journalist nodded. "That's the right mindset. Just be prepared for what he may throw at you. Sometimes the truth isn't enough for some people." As we wrapped up our conversation, I left the cafe feeling both rattled and empowered. I had been prepared for Derek to retaliate, but hearing it confirmed made the reality sink in deeper. I refused to let him dictate my narrative, and I was determined to stand my ground. When I returned home, I found Lisa waiting for me, her expression anxious. "How did it go?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for answers. "It went okay, but Derek is trying to fight back. He's spreading lies and trying to make it seem like I have some personal grudge against him." Her face fell and I could see the worry etched across her features. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We're going to stay strong. He can't break us. If we stand together, we know the truth and I won't let fear dictate our actions," I said firmly, squeezing her hand. "I want to help," she said, resolve filling her voice. "Whatever we need to do, I'm in. I won't let him push me around anymore." I felt a swell of pride at her determination. This was the moment I had been waiting for, her acceptance that she needed to reclaim her life and her choices. We were in this together, and it felt good to finally have a united front. Over the next few weeks, the theater community began to rally. Friends and acquaintances reached out to support us, sharing their experiences with Derek and standing up against his manipulative tactics. I felt a growing sense of camaraderie and strength as more people came forward, willing to expose the truth about him. As the community began to close ranks, it became evident that Derek was losing his grip. Productions that had once been a safe haven for him were starting to distance themselves, and whispers of his unprofessional behavior echoed through the halls of the theater. I felt a powerful sense of satisfaction knowing that the truth was winning out, but I also knew that Derek wouldn't go down without a fight. One evening, as Lisa and I were relaxing at home, we received a call from the journalist. They had just received a tip that Derek was facing potential legal issues regarding his treatment of actors and crew members. The walls were closing in on him, and it felt surreal to know that the tides were finally turning. "Do you think he'll actually face consequences?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I think it's very possible," I replied. "Karma has a way of catching up with people like him. He thought he could play everyone for fools, but now he's the one who's exposed." A few days later, news broke that Derek was being investigated for harassment allegations and unethical practices in his productions. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. While I didn't wish ill on anyone, it was clear that he had been operating under a veil of manipulation for far too long. The fallout was immediate. Derek's name was becoming synonymous with scandal, and many in the theater community began to express their relief that the truth was coming to light. I could see the shift. A community that had once been so enamored with his charm was starting to turn away in disgust. In the midst of all this, Lisa and I continued to rebuild our relationship. We talked openly about our feelings and the impact of her choices. I could see her becoming more confident, more empowered, and that brought me hope for our future. One night, as we sat together on the couch, I looked at her and smiled. "You know, I think we're going to be okay." She smiled back, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I've learned so much through all of this. It's not easy, but I want to be better. For you, for us." As we embraced, I felt a renewed sense of hope. We were not just survivors of this ordeal, we were becoming stronger together. The journey was far from over, but we were facing it hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever came next. In the end, the experience taught me that standing up for the truth was not just about revenge. It was about reclaiming our lives and ensuring that toxic behavior was exposed for what it truly was. Together, Lisa and I would forge a new path, ready to embrace our future, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The standing ovations we would receive would be for the resilience we had shown and the strength of our love, not for the deceitful games played by others.